this is Dave Douglas with A Noise from the D podcast, where I talk with musicians about inspiration, about technique, recording, touring, whatever else might come up. Seems to go in a different direction every time. Today, I'm welcoming the guitarist Rafiq Bhatia, a friend for many years, recently recording and touring with my band Gifts. Rafiq is also a solo artist and a member of the indie rock trio Sun Lux, who were nominated for an Academy Award for their score of the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. We got to chat about his music. One note, these podcasts are now being recorded live, and we invite all Greenleaf Music subscribers to come and watch live on Zoom. If this appeals to you, please head over to the Greenleaf Music Bandcamp page and subscribe for a year. You get access to the entire Greenleaf Music catalog, including brand new releases, free tickets, physical product, and merchandise. And as I mentioned, you get to watch live as I interview all the various guests and take questions from you, the subscribers. So thanks for listening. And now please enjoy my chat with Rafiq Bhatia. Thanks for coming. I'm here with Rafiq Bhatia. Hey, Rafiq, how you doing?
How you doing, Dave? I'm good.
You're in Brooklyn?
I'm in Brooklyn. I will be here for 24 hours longer than I was going to be
Oh,
as of a little while ago because they just canceled my flight. But
oh no.
I'm I'm here in my studio and gonna have a little bit more time here, which I'm never mad
What are you working on?
about. I'm working with Ryan and Ian. We have a band called Sunlux. We're working on a new film score for a project that I'm not allowed to say too much about it yet, but really, really exciting stuff.
If I said it, would I get in big trouble or?
If you said it, I would get in big trouble.
Okay, all
So
right. I
yeah,
know
so
nothing.
yeah, no one knows anything. But yeah, it's coming out next May. I've been working on that, and then I was about to go meet them.
Oh,
Well, now I'll go tomorrow, but we're working on new album material.
great. Awesome. Um, Before I ask you about guitar stuff and the things you do with that band and in the scoring and in your own music and also in my music, where we're playing and sometimes I feel like I only understand half of what's going on. And you're probably thinking to yourself, Rafiq, well, you understand less than half of what's going
No, I'm thinking to myself, that's more than I ever feel like I understand what's going
on.
on.
I want to play a track from your album, Breaking English, in case people haven't heard it. Anybody who's heard my album, Gifts, I think you'll hear this and you'll recognize the personal approach of Rafiq. pretty great.
Thank you, Dave.
Let me start by asking not a guitaristic question, but more just a conceptual question like,
Mhm.
where do you begin making a piece like that? Like, what's the inception? What's the seed? Like, I know how I write.
Yeah.
I have ways of getting to an idea that's going to grow into something.
hmm
So when you make Breaking English, how do your pieces start?
There was definitely kind of like an inversion of the process that I was sort of used to writing from, that took place while I was making this record.
Hmm.
And that was by design in part. I came from a background of playing the guitar and writing improvised music and creating these sort of structures for people to engage within, as improvisers and with distinct personalities. And um, but I was always sort of interested in the degree to which, like, I guess you could call it everything that happens from the microphone to the speaker, like once the music has been captured by a microphone to the point where it comes out of the speaker. Like I found with a lot of recordings that I would hear and love that were in the improvised music scene, there was sort of like a desire to like sort of capture and bottle the magic of a moment in which people are sharing space together and an idea is emerging in real time. And I had a very simultaneous love of that thing. And like that's like a big part of my DNA and where I'm coming from, but I also had this frustration with it because in a lot of musical communities, um that sort of part from where something's recorded to where it comes out of the speaker is such an active and creative part of the process of making music. And there's so much going on in that transition, um, that I just had a desire to get to a place where I could reconcile both of those things, where I could engage with what was happening in that chain of events without in any way sort of degrading the feeling, that ecstatic feeling of something happening in real time. And even to use everything that happens from the microphone to the speaker to sort of channel that feeling or accentuate it or heighten it, or just, for those things to work in concert in a way that still is working towards a similar aesthetic goal. Um, and around the time that I was getting interested in that, I started working more with producers. Like, I remember going over to Zach Saganaw's house one day. This is Shigeto who worked with Dave in High Risk. Like, we were working on some things. I was just trying to get, as a guitar player, get involved with people who were using the studio as an instrument, who were kind of working more with that electroacoustic process of composing. And around this time, I met my friends Ryan Lott and Ian Chang, and Ryan had this project called Sunlux. I started doing stuff with Ryan. Very quickly, it turned into a thing where the three of us were touring together.
Mhm.
This is a long-winded answer to your question. I'm sorry, but around this time, I got really interested in, like finally feeling like I was putting together the pieces to find an approach where I could start to compose in this way. And what I realized was that rather than writing music from the vantage point of like, okay, you've got the song, you've got the melody, let's say, or you've got the lyrics or something, like if you're writing a traditional song, and then you might think like, oh, okay, well, what kind of voice is going to sing that melody, or what kind of instrument is going to play those chords, or how are we going to represent the rhythm, or something like this. And what I noticed that a lot of these folks whose music I was so captivated by were doing was that they were actually starting with the very specific aspects of the sound color. Like it would be, oh, well, this sound of this vocalist, like singing this note, and then at the end it kind of frays and breaks. Like there's something really poetic about that sound. Maybe I'm going to construct an environment out of that sound or around that sound to frame it in such a way. And then maybe once I start to build that environment, some sort of formal principle will emerge from there, like that I can build a piece of music around. And so
Huh.
the Breaking English album, this song in particular, or not in particular, but this song included, was largely born out of that kind of a process.
Where the sounds come first.
Yeah.
To go back to your original analogy, what happens between the microphone and the capturing device is now happening before the microphone.
Yeah.
You're creating that process within your own playing.
Yeah. So a couple ways that you can think of it, like one is if you're an architect, usually you would design a house, and inside of that house you design a room, and then inside of that room you might be like, well, this chair would look really nice over here. And this way of working is kind of like, say, like starting with the chair and then designing the room around the chair and then designing the house around the room. And so it's like, rather than being top down, it's sort of bottom up. And what you find in working that way, and what I was finding when I was listening to music that was made in that way, was that there end up being these kind of formal structures that emerge from that would have been very hard to imagine if you had looked at it the other way around.
Right.
Like these like shapes can exist because they came from a process like that. So it's not just about like really loving the sort of like multifacetedness or like impressionism of the sound that you can kind of get to with something like this, but it's also like liking the way that the shape or structure of music emerges from a process like this.
Would you call the pieces on Breaking English songs?
I have a hard time thinking about what to call them. I think there is a degree to which some of them at least are in conversation with not only like the American popular song form, but also what I realized after having some space from making the Breaking English album and listening back to it. There's like a lot of formal stuff that I kind of got exposed to when I was growing up and listening to a lot of Bollywood records in my mom's car and just in films that she would be watching and that my sister would be watching. Like there are these sort of unexpected left turn kind of situations in that music that just make sense in a way that, like I think like having the cultural memory of that. It wasn't something I was thinking about when I was making the record, but going back and hearing it, I realized just how much some of that rubbed off on me.
Well, like song form as narrative storytelling
Yeah,
rather than as some sort of cyclical
exactly.
event
Yeah.
that goes around and has repeats and choruses and verses.
Mhm.
And as you're saying that, I was listening to Breaking English again, which I had back when it came out. Uh, and it reminded me of some of the sounds and approaches in the score, Everything Everywhere All at Once, that you guys made.
Mhm.
Now that you're saying that, then it sort of all goes together. Creating the music from the sound, from the bottom up, but also having this intuitive, maybe implanted in you early in your life, sense of event
Mhm.
and structure being events
Mhm.
as opposed to cycles.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in a good song, you come back to the chorus, but it's different. Maybe the person singing the song has learned from the thing that happened in the second verse, or like it, and it's there might be a change in instrumentation. Maybe there's a change in the way that the song is produced on the second chorus. Maybe there's a different reverb on the vocalist, so it's like a different kind of light shining on the person giving the monologue on stage. Like there are so many different ways that you can kind of either very, very subtly or not subtly at all, like communicate this kind of development. But I think um, I'm always fascinated. Like there is like actually quite a lot of cyclical music on Breaking English too, but I don't know if it's just not primarily driven by that, or the drive of it is almost happening in opposition to the fact that it's cycling.
Yeah, yeah. I guess maybe it would be improper thing for me to say, but it could use more trumpet solos. But other than that, um, I want to ask some more guitaristic questions. But first, I want to play the title track, Breaking English.
Cool. Yeah. Let's do it.
but that's great. I mean, there are a lot more recognizable guitar sounds on that, but also clearly you had vocalists. And did you have a drummer?
Yeah, yeah, vocalist, actually, many layers of Nina Moffat.
Nice.
Um, and, uh and Marcus Gilmore was playing drums.
Oh, great. Wow. So, and everything else comes from you?
The, like, bass on the front half of it is me, the electric bass on the back half of it is Jackson Hill.
Wow.
Yeah,
The guitar, obviously a big part of that track. Um,
yeah,
I suspect a part of the first track we heard too, the
yeah.
overview effect. However, a much less obviously guitaristic
Mm.
production of tone. And from what I've seen being around you, you dance pretty fluidly between creating sounds that don't necessarily sound like a guitar through an amp, but then also being able to go to a direct, either distorted or completely clean guitar sound. But a lot of the sounds are things you've created away from the guitar and then figured out how to activate from the guitar. Would that be a correct way of looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think over time, um, I've sort of in this process that I was talking about, like, growing interested in this music and finding ways to work this way.
Yeah.
The thing that I had going into it was, okay, well, I'm an instrumentalist that has an interest in music that's made this way. And so from the beginning, my way of engaging with it was like trying to see how I could learn from or contribute inside of a context like that. And a lot of times it was, oh, well, like, can you make a sound that behaves like this or that like feels like this? Um, or I would just be in a situation where, like, I remember there's this one very fuzzy sound that I use a lot that um is like somewhere between a square wave synthesizer and like a saxophone or something. Like it's like a very it's been a part of my sound for many, many years. And the reason why I stumbled upon it was because I was trying to make the guitar sound like a baritone saxophone to play one of Ryan's pieces from the Lanterns album when we went on the first tour. I was like, I gotta find a way to like make the guitar indistinguishable from the saxophone sound. And so I looked for it and I found, like, but these are things like I'll hear the way that like a compressor, like there's a thing that people, for those of you who don't know, there's a thing called a compressor that's used in recorded music where you're trying to kind of get the difference in the level between like the very loudest parts of a signal and the quietest parts of the signal into a range where it's not insane, so you can like listen to a piece of music in your car without it like either being unfathomably quiet during the quiet moments and like or just way too loud during the loud moments, and those devices have a behavior where they can be manipulated into sounding like they breathe, like they bloom and sort of there's movement in the sound as they work on the signal and try to level it out. And so there's like a lot of people who make electronic music who use that creatively and they will take a sound and you can hear the sound of the compressor working. So, I went and said like, well, I really love that sound and I just like the way it sounds. Like I don't necessarily want to get the sound in the same way that they are. And in fact, I'd like to be able to control how that breathing is expressed. So with a volume pedal, I found a way to sort of make the guitar sound like it's being compressed, but be able to control exactly how it moves. It's things like that. And I mean, it's not at all dissimilar from what my heroes did, like talking to someone like Bill Frisell, like that's totally like he wanted to get a distortion pedal because it made the guitar sound more like a trumpet, is what he told me, So I think it's in a long line of folks thinking about ways to start with what the guitar sounds like, which is something that many of us, I think, have a love hate relationship with. In the moments where it's the thing, there's nothing like it, but there's so many times where I'm chasing a sound that, doesn't feel native to it. And I just love that it can go in all these directions. And so, you know, I find myself looking for sounds like that.
One of the things that you do on stage with my band that I think you do with other bands as well, um, is that you don't play through the classic guitar amp. Um, and you have some pedals, but most of what you're doing is run through a computer. And then you have a stereo out that we're hearing through a stereo pair of monitor speakers that are placed behind you. So, and that's antithetical to the classic, oh man, if I had a Marshall stack, if I had whatever XYZ amp, Fender Ratatouille amp, it would sound so great.
Oh man, you got to get the Rakakuni edition.
That's
57 Rakakuni.
the classic, I got to have my amp. And I can relate. As a producer of tone on the trumpet, it's like having the right microphone and the right sounding monitor is so huge to my ability to play. So you've gone around that problem by plugging your guitar directly in and converting it to a digital signal. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does a lot of different things for me. I used to fly around with an amp in a Pelican case, like until pretty recently. In fact,
Wow.
I did that. I think I did that when we played. Maybe I didn't do that for the high risk. I can't remember, but at that time, that's what I was usually doing. Was I was flying with another checked piece that was this big, heavy Pelican case, and I took the smallest amp. But I had an amp that I still have it. It's a kind of the prototype for the sound that I'm chasing in the digital domain because it sounds like the guitar, but just the way I want to hear it. But I felt when I was playing the guitar through an amp that there was just this whole other side of my musical personality that I was developing working sculpturally with all these other sounds that were not coming from the guitar to build the music that I was making. And there are tools that I use to do that and all these things. And I was just like, man, I wish I could apply this to my practice as a guitar player because then I go over to the guitar and I'm trying to find a way to do something like this. And it feels like I'm chasing my tail a little bit. Like I wish I could take these two streams of what I'm working on and merge them. And so finding the digital signal, like more than helping me get the same sound from night to night, it I'm excited about it because it's helping me with that merger.
Right. To be able to carry both elements of the sound that you use. And we developed a shorthand language in the gifts bands where I need to listen for where you are in terms of which aspect of this area. There's a lot of different aspects. And I had to get better at being able to hear which was which. And in order to give a cue, Rafiq, it's not so different from, like, let's say if there's a tenor saxophone is soloing and
Mhm.
you're getting ready to give the cue to go on, but they're playing their Saturday night shit and they have their eyes closed.
It
It's not,
sounds exactly like that. No, I'm just kidding.
you can't give the cue until
Yeah.
everyone is primed for it and speaking the same language. And so I felt what was interesting in the trio was over time us figuring out how to work those cues sonically, just with what is being played to know, okay, here comes this transition and I need to turn this off and turn this on and get this kind of thing. Um, and it was interesting to me on certain tunes that we play. If you guys listen to the album, there's a tune called Third Dream. I would say that you play it more straight up guitaristically, but there's so much going on that I know there's a layer of Ableton and whatever crazy uh, structural computer design you did to make that
It's
sound.
actually that one is really straight up. Like that one is I designed there's a thing that's happening that's like reversing my signal and feeding it back in, but
Yeah,
it's it's like a reverse delay kind of thing, but it's not that much different than like what you could do with a delay pedal. But it's very stereo in the same way that like when you're playing trumpet and the room's speaking back at you, like
yeah,
a lot of these sounds that I'll design or these like environments I'll design, they behave a certain way when you push into them where they speak back at you. It's doing a little of that, but I don't think Ableton's doing anything on that one,
so you would
be
say
honest.
that's the
Yeah.
most guitaristic one.
I mean, I guess. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess what we do in gifts is a little different than what you do in the studio, in the sense that we have to get up on a stage at a specific time in a specific city and all do it at the same time.
Yeah.
And we don't get a second take. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
so the, the working out of that, and we've now done it in a few different formats, as a trio, as a quartet, as a quintet with Tamika Reed, which was really wonderful. Um, and each one of those, I felt like we adjusted. I mean, I adjust as a trumpet player, but maybe the adjustment is bigger for you because you have all of these processes going on simultaneously.
I mean, it's just like playing anything in that like you have to listen to what is coming back at you. Like it's just like if I showed up with a guitar and plugged it into an amp and we were playing music, and now there's four of us, so my density is going to change depending on the register of the person who has joined it. Like when we did the tour with Tamika, that was like a thing of like finding ways to kind of make the cello and all of the low end aspects that I had been doing when it was a trio or a quartet like work together. So
Yeah.
there's always that like, finding the right balance of everything. And I guess when you're wearing more hats, it multiplies the number of dimensions for that a little bit. But I love that. I love that part of the experience of playing live because like no matter how much is going on, I think we always want it to feel like it's it's real and tangible and that there's risk involved and that at any moment the train could go off the tracks.
Yeah. But I think what you said about listening to each other is the key aspect, that yes, the train could go off the tracks, but there's also an assurance that we're all listening to each other. And when the train does go off the tracks, we'll find something really interesting in the bushes that were alongside the tracks and make something out of that, which happened quite often in interesting ways.
Yeah.
People have probably heard my record Gifts, and Rafiq plays on it along with Ian Chang and James Brandon Lewis. I just want to play a couple minutes of the title track so I can ask Rafiq something. Well, if you haven't heard the whole record, then you should go get it. As far as my question for you, Rafiq, it's really about the transition you make in that track in the first 2 minutes from pretty ethereal chord ish sound effect stuff that blends really well with what Ian is doing electronically. And in that track, there's a lot of stuff going on around the drum kit and sounds that Ian himself is triggering uh, into a sort of a dreamy, more guitaristic, but still pretty delayed guitar sound that's now playing chords, even though the chords that I wrote are a rudimentary intentionally, but also not falling metrically. And then into a metrical zone where there's very specific chords, and suddenly you don't have all the reverb on the guitar, and it's pretty much straight. And that's a lot of stuff going on for you. Is is it not? I was on a jury recently, and I learned that to ask the question, you say what you want to say, and then you say, "Is that correct?"
Yeah, that I mean, that one and it gets more involved later when there's like a low frequency thing happening at the same time. Basically, like around the time that we started, a little before that, I had stumbled upon this framework, or not stumbled upon, I've been working towards for a really long time, this framework. You know, like how a guitar player will have like a loop pedal and they'll be able to sample little phrases of what they've played. Like maybe they play a little melody that they like and they can just take that. And the simplest version of it is that it records into the loop pedal and then through the amp, however loud you want it to be, it'll just play that thing back over and over and over again. But people have gotten really sophisticated over the years with what you could do with one of those. And you can change the pitch of the thing that you recorded. So you can play it down an octave or up 2 octaves or, and then you can play it forwards or backwards. It's, kind of similar to what you could do with a tape machine. Traditionally, people have been able to do a thing where they'll sample different aspects of themselves into a loop and maybe they'll use different guitar sounds going into that loop. So if they want there to be some element of it that's really low, they'll pitch the sound of the guitar down with an octave pedal and then they'll
Mm.
record it into the looper along with all these things. But then all the things are all stuck together in this one mess and you can't really control any of the sounds separately. They're just sort of all glued together for better or for worse.
Hmm.
And what I had in mind was like, well, what if I could sample different personalities or different kinds of elements of what I was doing independently of one another so that once I had recorded them, I could just change the pitch of that one aspect, or I could throw that other aspect up 2 octaves, or I could reverse that other aspect, or I could make one of them really dark and filtered sounding and another really bright. And, so what it would allow me to do is basically to take all these different ingredients and make a meal out of it that has a lot of different contrast in it. Um, all of my analogies really are about cooking. Um, so the overview effect at the time that I was making that song, I was watching the Netflix series Chef's Table. Did you ever watch that, Dave?
No, should I?
It's cool. Yeah, there's these documentary episodes. It's like a little self-serious sometimes, but I think it's really beautiful and I learned a lot from watching it. Even though I had never eaten a meal like the ones that are described in the series. Um, but the first episode is about this chef from Modena in Italy, and his name is Massimo Bottura, and he has a restaurant called Osteria Francescana. At some time, it was rated the best restaurant in the world.
Wow.
Massimo is from Modena, which is like where balsamic vinegar of Modena comes from. It's in Parmesan, so Parmesan cheese comes from there. And he opens the episode by being like, if you ask anyone around here who the best chef in the world is, without hesitation, they'll all say the same thing. They'll just be like, oh, my grandma. The food culture is so high level and so rich and deep that why would you ever mess with it? And so he opened this restaurant where he was doing all these experimental things with the food, and everyone there at first hated it, but then he ended up the like food critic for a big publication got a flat tire and went and that was the closest restaurant to where he got the flat tire and then he wrote this big thing and everyone from all over Europe started coming to this town in Modena to go to the restaurant and then the people who lived there realized that the restaurant was actually a love letter to their cuisine and then now everyone loves it so it's a happy ending. Anyway, he has a dish on the menu that is it's all Parmesan cheese and it's he worked with the producers of the cheese for a long time and he sampled it at different ages and he realized that at different ages Parmesan cheese has very different flavor characteristics and so he decided to compose this dish that is made of 5 different ages of Parmesan and they're all in different states.
Hmm.
So one of them he made into a foam, and one of them is a wafer, and one is like a ice cream. Basically, I was working on the overview effect at the time that I was watching this episode. And I had all these different guitar sounds that I was using, and I was trying to make them all more similar to each other, and it was just backfiring. Everything sounded undifferentiated and kind of, like I couldn't get it to really speak. And then I was watching this and I realized, oh, it's actually about exaggerating the differences between all of these things that best allows them to work together. And so going back to what we were talking about this looping thing and sampling and all this stuff, what I wanted to do was to be able to sample myself and then treat the sounds in very, very different ways so that the composite felt like not like a guitar player layering a bunch of things on top of each other, but like a bunch of people doing little things and that they could all independently of each other be evolving. So like what I'm doing when we're playing, like I'll be playing with you and the guitar is doing something that is more kind of immediately related to what's happening in that moment, but then there might be these other layers that are in the background, um that I'm manipulating with my feet. Like, so I'm like having those layers also responding in different ways to what's happening in the music and changing in real time, even though they're vestiges of something that happened before that kind of get like subliminally hung on to. And, it creates the resulting thing is feels more environmental because you can change them all at once. So that's why when you point to me and you're like, okay, it's time to go to the bridge, I'm like, shit, I got to get all four of you guys to get there, like
Right.
talking to the different layers or whatever. So yeah, that's what's happening in that first couple minutes is that when I go to the second sound, the first sound is still there and it's
Yeah.
changing in different ways. And then when we go to the third sound, when it's the section that's more defined metric chords, everyone else has to go, but you don't want it to just feel like the rug gets pulled out. So how do you sneak everyone else out?
Right.
You know,
Right. Right. Just to talk a little bit about Ian, who you work with so closely in Sunlux, um, but in this band, Gifts, I feel like the two of you have a relationship developed. You seem to have an understanding, and on in the studio, we were able to get at that in a few places. There's a song called "Small Bar" where that really happens quite a bit. That symbiotic relationship between the drums. I think the fact that Ian has his own electronic resources as well makes a big
his own.
difference. He's got his own story.
Yeah.
He's got his own, he's using triggers off a couple of his different drums. And then he's also got, is it Ableton running or is it just a trigger, a sampler?
Yeah. So he uses a software called sensory percussion that
Mhm.
it's its own standalone thing. I don't think he might be using Ableton for the things he's doing that are not coming from the drums because he's also
Right.
doing some other
There's a
things. So
few of
yeah,
those. Yeah. Yeah. There's one tune in particular where he has something that's in tempo that he created. He brings in sometimes at a certain point of the tune. And since the tune is very, very improvised, um, sometimes it ends up not being called for. Sometimes he brings it in a place that none of us expect. Where it comes in on the record is in an unusual and surprising place. Um, but I guess my question to you, Rafiq, is just did you guys consciously work on playing together to develop that symbiotic language, or is it just a matter of a number of hours and intuition? Or is it something that you talked about a lot specifically? Is that correct, sir?
I think it's it's all of the above. Like I mean, first of all, when we met, we both were in this very similar place where we were coming from a background as instrumentalists, but wanting to understand that process that I was talking about, like the studio as a instrument kind of way of not only making music, but also that we wanted to develop a language on our respective instruments that was informed by and in conversation with that kind of um, way of making music. So um, we both kind of developed our own approaches to doing that side by side
Mm.
over years of playing in a band together and sharing more days on the road and more meals and more like I've spent more time with Ian than any other musician, and it's a lot of time, and I feel so grateful for that. Like I've learned so much from that guy, and he's a beautiful person and friend and one of my big inspirations. And so I think like even if we hadn't wanted to do that, just like being in the situations we've been in, even if we didn't talk at all about it, some of it would be there anyway. But I think we also have talked a lot about it. And I don't really want to call it rhythm section because it's a bit of an esoteric take on that term, but maybe that's the best or most apt term for what it is.
You both went to music school, jazz school specifically, right? Or no?
Well, I did for a year and then I left, and then he went to that school after that and he stayed the whole time. And when I left, I went to a different school and I did a different major. Like I didn't major in music, but I did spend a lot of time in the music conservatory, like thinking about and working on music and studying and playing with people. And
It's interesting because Zach Saginaw, aka Shigeto, went to the new school
right.
and
Yeah.
was studying to be a jazz drummer and sort of figured out that that's not really who he was and dropped out of school and left music for a while. But I feel like in a similar to way to the way that you and Ian play, there is a background in having been around people playing jazz broadly defined, people
Mhm.
playing, music coming out of American composed and improvised song form
Mhm.
in whatever ways. And so that I think that in the band, in my band, Gifts, I value that, even though it's such a small piece of what we actually do. I sort of feel like without that mutual background of understanding, then maybe the music wouldn't work.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Because I feel like
yeah.
what I write uses the nuts and bolts of that vocabulary to look for a new way that we can all play.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
You sort of have to had some exposure to what that language is.
Yeah, I have a very hard time imagining how we would play the music if we did, you know? Um, I mean, I also just have a very hard time imagining what my life would be like if that music wasn't a foundational aspect of it. I don't just mean my musical life, I just mean my life.
If people haven't seen Everything Everywhere All at Once, the music is so extraordinary. It's worth going back to see it again. um, and mute the video image. No, I'm kidding. It helps to see it with the image too, but the music is really fantastic. And I know whatever you all are cooking up now is going to be, the next level of that. And I guess my question, and we should wrap this up, so maybe it's a parting question, but do you feel like your practice now has diverted more from what we would describe as a more traditional grasp of the nuts and bolts of American composed and improvised music?
I think actually, and on this project, we're going to be working with orchestra. So there is a different kind of aspect of American composed music that is entering the picture, and I'm learning about ways to approach that medium and also ways that it has been approached before that are informing me. Like any situation like this, I just look at in the same way that I spent a lot of time with Billy Hart when I was a college student, and he was always looking for opportunities to learn something new. You know, in his 80s, he wants to learn new stuff.
Yeah.
So, in any situation, and especially one that's sustained work like this, like I'm grateful for that. And so, yeah, I don't know if it's a departure. It actually, in some ways, feels like I'm like dealing more closely with a different side of that than I have before.
Wow, that's really interesting. I can't wait to hear it. From what I understand, you're fairly far along. Like you've written the main titles, you have an approach. That's probably a huge part, creating the world in which all the music is going to be poured.
Yeah, I mean, I think so they're just finishing shooting it now, and so it'll start to go into like editing scenes together, and then things we've written will start to get really tested in a more
Wow.
like, does it work with what they've shot? And what version of it do we need to discover together that will support what they've shot? We've written something that at least like tentatively is the direction thematically for how we're moving forward, but that could change at any time, you know. And I think yeah, it's a fluid process, and I'm learning just as much as anyone as we go through it.
Well, I can't wait to hear it. Is there going to be another Rafiq Bhatia album anytime soon?
2025. Yeah.
Great. So it's already made.
It's almost done. Yeah.
Can you get me on it?
Oh
If
man.
you need trumpet, no, I know you work with other inferior trumpet players, and that's okay with me.
Oh man,
I
Is
understand.
Riley on this Zoom? No, he's
You
not.
don't
Oh
know
man.
Riley's not here, so I can speak freely. But you don't want to be outshone. I know how it is, so it's okay.
Oh my god.
Of course, I'm kidding.
I'm gonna
Rafiq, it's such
I'm
a
gonna they mastered it, but I'll just go mute all of his tracks and then
if you need me to send you some tracks you can replace his stuff with, just let me know. Um, Riley Mulherker plays a lot with Rafiq, and it's great,
I co-produced his record. And
which is great.
thank you. I've had the opportunity to guest with him some, but yeah, he's been doing stuff with Chris Padishall and a number of other folks. I think it's sort of a fluid lineup right now, but I'm excited to hear where that goes because they're going to be playing that music live more later this year.
Well, it's been great to be playing with you.
Likewise.
We're going in a few weeks back to Europe in a quartet with James Brandon Lewis and Ian Chang. All the music from the album, and I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. What an honor.
Thanks for making time for this. It's super fascinating, and this is the kind of stuff that we never have time to really sit down and talk about. I suppose on long train rides we could, but we're always sort of involved in survival issues. So this was really 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 enlightening for me, and thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much.
And have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.